Take it easy.
Hey everybody, welcome in to the Easy Approach. I am Nate, and as always, I'm joined by Tony Zuma.
Hello.
And once again, for the third part in this series we've been doing on Job, we're joined by good buddies, Michael Schlinder and Kanan Evans.
Hey.
Howdy.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for joining us again. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this third part. Maybe you've listened to all three of these in a row, maybe not. Either way, I think it's a very interesting perspective, each one of these episodes, breaking down Job in such a way that we connect it to real life, you know? Nate, you were just talking about how the focus of today's episode is going to be really Job's situation from God's perspective, right?
Yeah. So episode 1, just maybe you're tuning in here and you haven't listened to episode 1 or 2. That's theoretically fine. It's wrong, but it's fine. The first episode revolved around Job's buddies, in quotation marks, and they show up and they're giving Job they're giving him the old "what'd you do? What did you do to deserve this?" That's right. Yeah. Tell us your secret sin, Job. So in the narrative, they represent this like gross oversimplification of the universe. This people who do good in God's eyes get blessed and they become rich and wealthy and everything goes well. And people who do evil get cursed and things fall apart and things are always terrible and nothing's ever okay or good. Job is the foil to that idea, because Job didn't do anything wrong. As the readers, we know that, and still all this, terrible stuff is happening to them. So we talked about their perspective in episode 1. If that sounds interesting and you haven't checked that episode out yet, I recommend hopping over there and listen to it real quick. It's great, but you can still listen to this one without getting into that one. Episode 2, we got into Job's perspective in this whole thing, which is confused, frustrated, doubting, but also determined to find an answer. He has these moments where he says, God clearly never loved me. He clearly created me just to curse me. And he has these other moments where he says, but I know that God is good. And I remember his goodness upon my life. And I'm going to keep searching until I find an answer. Now, we alluded in the last 2 episodes that in the end here, God is going to rebuke Job's friends.
Yeah.
And their oversimplification of this whole situation. And he's going to affirm Job very, very explicitly. He'll say, Job, you have spoken of me what is true, unlike your friends. So coming into this final stretch here, we wanted to talk about God's perspective, because the final word in this whole thing is God himself showing up and addressing Job. Before that, though, as we were gearing up to hit the record button here, Kanan said, "Have we talked about Elihu yet?" For those in the audience who don't know who that is, can somebody give me a quick description of Elihu?
Brief summary is don't worry about him.
Yeah. Michael, how would you summarize Elihu's voice in this whole back and forth?
Yeah, so Elihu shows up at the very end, and honestly, he kind of rolls in and sounds kind of self-important, honestly. He's just like, listen, I'm young and y'all are old, so I wasn't going to say anything. But listen, the Spirit of God is what's important, so I'm going to hit you with some knowledge. And then he says mostly the same stuff with maybe just a pinch of nuance to it, where they've all been saying, well, God, he's just, and he wouldn't be doing this to you if you were good, man. And so just fess up your sin. Meanwhile, Elihu is like, listen, it could be that God is trying to teach you a lesson of some kind. There's instruction here. And that's really all he kind of adds additionally to any of the friends. And then God shows up after his speech, and you don't hear about Elihu again.
Right.
So everyone forgets about him, including God. God doesn't even mention him.
Yeah, that's the big thing. It's why whenever I teach through this book, I often just give the smallest little side remark about Elihu. The friends deserve a lot of attention because God is going to address their perspective. Job, obviously the book revolves around him, and God will address Job directly. And Elihu pops in for a handful of chapters, says, "How dare you question God?" and then is ignored by everyone. I'm sure there's some more thinking I could do about that one, but I'm not going to right now. We're going to go to God's perspective to kind of wrap this whole story up, if that sounds good to you guys.
Sounds good.
All right. So we've had, to kind of segue us into this, we've had 30 some chapters now of Job wrestling and his friends lecturing, and God is finally going to break his silence here at the end. Part of Job's issue is like, why me? Why God? Why? Why is this happening? God shows up and he's, I don't know if this has ever struck you guys before, but God kind of ignores Job's questions and instead launches at Job with this gigantic, epic, poetic tour of the universe, almost. He throws all these questions at Job that he knows Job can't answer. Things like, Job, tell me, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? He said, tell me if you have understanding, Job. Who was it who determined the measurements of creation? Surely you must know. There's some it's fascinating. There's sarcasm here. It's like, tell me if you have understanding. Surely you must know. Who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? On who laid, or who laid its cornerstones when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Have you entered the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? All those sorts of questions. When you hear that, after 30 chapters of this, what is that? What's your first response?
It just goes to show that as Christians, we should be sarcastic. Totally. Why not?
That's right. The sarcasm is here.
That's right. It's the Christian, love language. There you go.
Justification. Yes.
We've been hitting the nail on the head in this group for sure.
That's right. I'm pretty sure teenage me found this little section where God was sarcastic. And then like my youth leader had been doing this big series on not being sarcastic to each other, and I was like, well, look at this, youth leader, this is why I can be a sarcastic
in the
little
Bible
twerp, because I'm just being like God. Probably the wrong lesson to take from this. What's y'all's genuine gut reaction though when you see God show up and in response to all of Job's questions, like, why is this happening, God? Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this? God says this stuff, like zooms way out and says, well, tell me, Job, like you clearly know. So where were you when the foundations of the earth were laid? Who measured it? Who commanded the morning? Who entered the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep?
Yeah, I think for me, the first time I read this, I was honestly really confused, because I just wasn't really sure what was happening. Like this whole time, Job's been asking for like a courtroom time. Like, let me defend myself here, man. And when God shows up, there's like no explanation for why Job has been suffering, really. At least like on first read through glance, I was like, well, that was a really unsatisfying response to human suffering.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah. I totally resonate. I totally resonate with that. It feels deeply unsatisfying.
Yeah.
He's avoiding the question, Your Honor.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it definitely is it seems at first glance for me, the similar perspective that this is someone who's bigger and better and badder than you are. And how dare you think that you know what's going on, and you can't even begin to fathom,
Yeah. Cannon, what do you think?
I think it's easy to leave out too that like you're talking to a guy who's killed, like whose kids just died. Like it's not like, okay, we stripped you of your wealth. Like that's one thing, which I think most like solid people could deal with that, right? You're like, oh man, things were good, now they're rough. But it's like your family's died, everybody forsook you. Your friends don't like you anymore, or at least think you're a bad guy. And I tend to agree. I'm like a little bit like it's slightly off-putting reading the response at first glance. So as a person who doesn't know Job super well, I'm interested to hear where this goes because I don't like it.
Yeah. That's all there is to it. It's just
That's it
off-putting,
in the story.
There it is.
So thank you guys for joining us for episode 3.
Yes.
We are
This
gonna get
episode
into
is
some more-
Christians suck. There we go.
That's right. And God's worse. Yeah.
That's right. God is worse. Sarcastically worse.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys this. God certainly changed the subject here. Like any talk of Job's situation and the why, it's completely left on the side. And this seems very unrelated. This discourse about creation and the universe, and God talks about how vast it is and how great it is, and then he even like starts talking about these creatures, the sea, the stars, lions, even like behemoth and leviathan, and these creatures that in like the human's mind, like to a human, these are like the most powerful, untamable, monstrous creatures. And God goes, who created them, right? Like who designed these things? Who controls them? Who leads them? And all the above. So it's like either A, God is talking about totally unrelated things, and it's like, look how big and strong I am. Shut up. Be quiet. Or he's reframing the discussion in a sense of, maybe the perspective that God is trying to bring here is not an answer to the question that Job and his friends have had. Maybe there's a sense of redirecting the conversation to a different question. I mean, by the end of this whole thing, in chapter 42, Job himself will say, I have uttered what I don't understand. I have said things, and I didn't even understand what I was saying. So taking it to the next little thing, it's interesting. God describes all this creation stuff, and where were you when everything was created and the earth was laid on its foundations and all that. After that first little part, Job goes, fine, I'll be silent. Like I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
And then God goes, no, not enough. And then he goes into all these other things, talking about, like I said, the seas and the lions and behemoth and leviathan. Why do you think God would bring something like that up?
I think it's interesting. And if Job's first response is, okay, like you've proved your point, I'll shut up. I have no room to speak now. And then he still keeps going.
It seems like if the point was to make Job shut up, then God would have been satisfied with that first part.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
But he doesn't stop there. He goes into this whole other thing. So what's going through your guys' heads?
Yeah, I'm just kind of poking through just really briefly some of the things he mentions again. Just because he brings up a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. He wants to talk about stars and oceans, but then he also wants to talk about goats and weather patterns and like wild donkeys.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yep.
I mean, so the elements that kind of come to mind just from that is like he's bringing up stuff in creation that has order, but it's also like it's wild. It's untamable in some cases. Try to tame a wild donkey that's already grown up and it's been wild. Type of line of thinking as the first thing, which is again, it's a very interesting point that God seems like he wants to start with, which is just like creation there's some chaos in it, man. It is wild.
I think what's like part of what's happening here is God's clearly like he's clearly enlarging or attempting to enlarge Job's perspective, because Job up to this point has obviously been understandably focused on the things that are happening to him or the things that have just happened to his immediate like life, right?
Absolutely.
And God is going to take this and expand it like way out. This whole section is pretty famously superb poetry. And there's this like the descriptions of the creation and the highs and the depths and all of its design held in order by God. There's like this majesty to it. There's like the beauty of the creation, but it's almost like an invitation, not just of like, think about how amazing creation is. It's all framed within the idea of like, who was the one who took this thing that is unimaginably big to you. These things that you have no concept of how these things could have been put together or how they can be held together. It's so far above and beyond you. And I, the one who you have been talking to, I am the one that has designed all of this, that has done all of this, that's holding it all together. So I think my first suggestion here is that God is changing or is attempting to broaden Job's perspective to this idea that's like, I'm bigger, Job, than you can possibly imagine. And I still think we could take that as like, well, God's saying, look how big I am, so therefore you shut up.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that Job does shut up and God goes, no.
Yeah.
Let me continue. That doesn't seem to be God's goal. So he is kind of cutting Job down to size. Like this first little section seems to be about Job's ignorance, right? It's like there's all these things that Job has no ability to do anything with or no idea of how all of it works. And yet God, the God he's talking to, is able to handle all this in his power and in his understanding. But the second part seems less about ignorance and more about littleness. Do you guys see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's all of these other creatures, there's all the rest of this parts of creation that Job is so much smaller than and weaker than, and things that Job tries to control, or like maybe like animals or creatures that Job would try to lead or control, but then scaling upwards to other animals or creatures that he absolutely can't do anything to overcome or control. And it's like this, like, can you play God, Job? Can you put the world to right? Job, are you going to teach me my business? How do you compare to these great creatures of the earth? And I do agree that it seems like very confusing. Like God's just listing off these random things, these random creatures about the fastest of creation, these mighty beasts or whatever else. And my reaction for a long time has been, you're ignoring the question. You're ignoring Job's questions and then our questions. And that can be very disappointing. But I think there's no mistaking that there's a thrust here of cutting Job and us down to size. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I almost have the perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's like when Job shuts up to begin with, right? He's like, okay, God, I see what you're doing. You're way bigger than me. I'm nothing. I'm, like not even worth your attention. And by God continuing, he's saying, whoa, like I'm not trying to make you like feel like you're nothing. I'm not trying to make you seem like there's nothing that you can understand here. I want you to understand. I want you to see the reality that it's not just me being bigger and better and badder than you. It's me trying to get you to understand that you are little and reality is wild. And there are things that you can't control. And you need to understand that, not just sit down and shut up because I tell you to. That's not the purpose of this. It's let's have a look at how things actually are.
Yeah, it's perspective altering.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's less of I don't read God's tone here as like a harsh rebuke.
Yeah,
but it does seem like okay, you have a lot of questions. Now pay attention. I want you to remember. I want you to remember or to realize who I am. And I think you can take that as a look at who I am, shut up.
Yeah.
But I think it's less of a look at who I am, shut up, and a lot more of a you're questioning the way I'm able to handle creation.
Yes.
You're questioning the way I'm able to handle all these things that are like God lists these repeated things, these like things that are infinitely bigger than Job, and things that Job knows he cannot and could never handle. And God goes, you're questioning the way I'm able to handle this, and if I'm able to handle this. Well, first of all, you take for granted that I'm able to handle all this. Yeah. You take for granted that that I was the one that created all this. So, Job, do you think that you are a philosopher like posing these impossible questions to me. Really, Job, understand that if I can handle all of these things, do you think that I'm capable of handling your life? Do you think that I am, if you trust me to handle all of creation and all of these creatures and whatever else, do you think that you can trust me with your life? I mean, there isn't a defense here. There isn't a, like, God saying, well, let me show you the complicated elements of reality and why bad things can happen. And because God's not accountable to us, right? We are accountable to him. But the whole thing here, and this is what really kind of keys in the way I have to read this, is Job's reaction. Because he doesn't, his end response is not, I'll shut up. His end response, and this is his very, very famous response in chapter 42, verses 2-6. He says this, and this is very, very, I think this really is telling at what God is communicating to Job through this whole thing. Job says, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. I have heard of you, but now my eyes see you, and therefore I repent in dust and ashes.
Huh.
That's his conclusion. That's that's Job's response to everything that God has said. It's like it's less of a, I'm sorry for being bad, but what do you think he's repenting of?
I think in a way he is repenting of misunderstanding or not realizing just how big God is, maybe, or how capable. I don't know if control is the right word, but how in control God is actually of all these things that are so much bigger than anything Job's ever fathomed.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of a video I saw recently of like a guy who, it was all caught on like a dash cam, you know, and this guy cut somebody off and is shouting at him on the highway, you know, and they pull over and the guy gets out of his car, and then the guy who he cut off gets out of the car, who has the dash cam, and he walks up to him, and the guy who gets out of the car, who's like clearly not the aggressor, is like 6'5". And this other guy, immediately his demeanor changes. Like he goes from like super upset and angry at the situation to like, oh no, what have I done? Like slightly shamed, you know what I mean? And then like not fully cowering, but like he clearly is like changing his tone, you know what I mean? I think it's almost a little bit of that, where he's like, Job clearly seems to be humbled, you know what I mean? Like, and like, okay, a little bit of perspective. Like I had to swallow that pill in a way where, okay, I'm understanding there's some different things at play here that I'm not taking into account. You know what I mean? And it strikes me as almost a little bit of that, like slightly humbled, you know? That's just what came to my mind. I just thought that was funny.
Yeah.
Funny.
Yeah, it's good. Michael?
Yeah, not quite the same story, but actually another traffic issue came to mind when I was thinking about this. So I was driving around where I live, Madison, Wisconsin, and there's a really busy intersection, and it has a sign that says no turn, like no right turn on red. So like I want to turn right, but the light's red, and so I don't turn. And the dude behind me is honking his horn because he wants me to turn. There isn't anyone there, but I have a sign that's telling me like, you know, you're not supposed to do that. So I just I rolled my window down and like gestured at the sign. Just like pointed like up and over at the sign. And I just I look in my rear view and I just see the guy kind of make like a small wave. So like a very oh, sorry, I didn't know. is kind of like the line of thinking that kind of came to me. Because again, with Job's story, we have more insight than what Job has, because the start of the story tells us at least a little bit of what's happening. The accuser has showed up and he's basically said, you know, the way that you're working in creation doesn't seem so good. Your most righteous boy is probably just that way because you give him all the good stuff. Wouldn't everyone be righteous if you just paid them all off, brother? And then, he tries to prove his point. So we have that little piece of information. Job through the whole thing is saying, what did explain what's going on. Like if you let me explain, I'm sure you'll stop with this like punishment that's on me. And his friends show up and they're like, I have an explanation. It's because you suck and you sin.
Right.
And God hates that stuff. So quit whining about it. And then Elihu shows up and he's like, hey, I have an explanation for you. It's because he's trying to make you better, stronger. Also, you suck and you sin. You should fess up. And then when God shows up, he doesn't do the same thing. He's like what Nate was saying. It's like what you don't need here actually is an explanation. Actually, what you need is a reorientation to who I am and how creation works. You seem to think you know how it works and how I interact in it. Allow me to disabuse you of that notion. And in a way, in my head, I can kind of see God almost, he's like pointing at the sign and in traffic, and Job's going, oh yeah, sorry.
Oh shoot.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, and for me, it really is very important the way Job responds, because I think if the end conclusion of this is Job been saying, "I'm sorry, I questioned you," and God goes, "You're darn right, never let that happen again," then we'd have to read this very differently. But like God is clearly cutting Job down to size, but I think it's less of like a "you shut up," and more of like a "do you remember who I am? Like you worship me as the Almighty God," and then you say, "But this series of events can't possibly be okay. This is not acceptable because it can't work out well. Like there can't be any positive conclusion that would come out of this that would fit in line with my beliefs about who God is." And God goes, "Really? That feels like you're putting me in quite the little box, Job.
That's right.
It feels like
yeah.
you're limiting my ability and my wisdom to a pretty serious box. So how about I remind you of the kind of things that you can look around you and remember what kind of God I am. Let's look at creation. Let's look at the seas and the mountains and the sky. Let's look at the most powerful creatures in the world. Remember who created them and who controls them, Job. Do you think that I'm not capable of handling my business? Do you think I'm not capable of handling your life and of working things out to where they are good and redeeming and holistic in the end? I think Job is we talked about how Job as a book really complicates the oversimplified view of reality, that bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people, by throwing in the bad things happen to good people. And then Ecclesiastes will go, and good things happen to bad people. So like you have both sides of it. But the reality is, there's never a simple, well, here's the formula. And if you understand this formula, it will explain why the bad thing happened. That's never going to be the case in life. There's an infinite amount of moving pieces in the complexities of life for why something bad would happen, like a disease, like a car crash, like losing your job. There's all kinds of things that happen, and it's never as simple as God zapped you, or you did evil, or you're being judged, or whatever else. I think what Job needs, and what we need, because we're being read into the story here as the reader, we're being invited in to ask the same questions that Job is answering. I think what we do not need is a formula. I think what we need is a perspective, not a formula shift, but a perspective shift, less of an equation and more of a person. Because the fundamental question is this God a God that we can trust in spite of the things that I look and see around me? When I look around and see impossible, this can't possibly work out okay. Is God the kind of God that I can say, even if I can't see how this could be all right, or how this could be possibly good, can I trust God to make it so in the end? And I think that's where we step into Job's picture here. And it's like, it's uncomfortable. I want the very direct, exact answers to my questions.
Mm-hmm.
But the Bible doesn't exist to always give us the direct, exact answers to our questions. It exists to invite us into a further wrestling and dynamic relationship with God, such that we're able to learn wisdom from Him.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
just to hop in real quick, like I feel like there can be an unintentional obsession that can start to occur when it comes to, like, I don't know, when you're worrying about a problem, right? It makes me think of the New Testament when there's, I think, Matthew maybe specifically calling out, if God is taking care of these birds, and if God takes care of the flowers here, it's like, are you not that much more valuable than those things? And so, like, why are you obsessing over these details? Which, yeah, if it's a terrible, tragic situation, yeah. But it's like when you cross that threshold of, like you said, Nate, like, instead of dealing with your situation and moving forward and recognizing God for who He is, you are becoming so obsessive that you're putting God into this tiny little box of, oh man, like I'm nothing. He doesn't care about me, or maybe he hates me, or any of these things. But he's so much bigger than that. In if He can handle all those bigger things, if He can handle the birds and everything, then He can also know what's happening in your life and not think that you're not worth His time, which is the impression that I got very early on looking at Job, that Job wasn't worth God's time.
Yeah, let's segue to the over God's kind of final response to Job's line, where I don't think he's so much Job is repenting of doing evil, but it's more like, I'm sorry I had limited you into such a box, and I had forgotten who I was talking to.
Mm-hmm.
But the really big plot twist at the end of this whole thing, if you're reading it for the first time, is God rebukes Job's friends and not Job. Where Job, who's the one who's wrestling and accusing and doubting God, he says to Job's friends, you guys have not spoken what's true of me, unlike Job. Job spoke what's true of me, not you. So that's huge. That's really, really huge, because it tells us that God prefers Job's messy, even angry, but very honest relationship with Him over the black and white, false defense of God. Because the friends came in trying to defend God, but God rebukes them in the end for it. So it's Job is an invitation, I think, to see God in a new perspective and to be reminded there are times when you're not going to have an answer to your question, many times. But who God is and how much bigger He is than us is sometimes the answer to the question. Or it's sometimes the thing that we need rather than the answer to the question to go, I cannot see how this could possibly be okay, but I trust that God can. But then we have the happy ending. How do you guys feel about the happy ending?
I'm just thinking maybe all of Job's first set of children were really ugly and terrible children. And maybe since his new kids are beautiful, maybe they're great kids, everything worked out. And maybe his wife was horrible, and then she left, and now he has a wonderful wife.
I think
we know his wife was not the best,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it could have turned down his benefit. There's so many ways,
I mean, look, I don't know if you guys remember here, but right at the very, very beginning of the book, Job is described like a Noah who is upright and blameless. Like, literally, he's described like a Noah character. And then his sons are described like the people in the world. His sons are like, what they're doing is basically, they're living like the rest of the world. They're described like the way the rest of the world lived during the time of Noah. And the Noah is trying to make a sacrifice for them. And he's like, He's doing burnt offerings for them and saying, my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And so Job was continually sacrificing for them. So, there's a whole other, there's other things there that we can talk about. We won't talk about it, but we could talk about it. But that happy ending, does it feel satisfying to you, or does it risk making the whole thing seem like a transaction? Like suffer well and you'll get rewarded kind of deal?
Well, I feel like, there are consequences, both on good choices and bad choices, right? And you alluding a little bit to some of the choices that his sons were making. It's like we always look at this story from the context of, oh, God allowed these bad things to happen, and Job's kids are dead now, And it's like the reality. If this was a reality thing in today's context, it's like those kids or his sons made choices, and maybe there's something that was consequences of bad choices that they've made. And so it's like when on the other side of the coin, when Job makes good choices and there are good consequences that come from that, I don't look at that necessarily as transactional,
I mean, you hate to see a guy who is apparently a good guy, just everything fall apart. So it feels very justified almost for him to get everything back. And maybe not everything, but his situation is obviously, his life is altered, but everything is kind of restored. You know what I mean? That's kind of, I think as humans, it's what we want to see, right? We want to see somebody who is a good person or follows God do well, But to your point, Tony, it's like clearly Job was a not only just a good person, he was a good steward, right? He's got thousands of livestock. He's managed his household correctly. It probably was just almost like, I'm sure God blessed him. You know what I mean? And it clearly says God blessed him, but he clearly knows how to handle that stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. You put that stuff in the hands of an idiot, and they're gonna ruin everything. They'll squalor everything away. So I don't know. Yeah, you like to see it. I'd like to see at the end that things turned out well for him. It would kind of feel, I don't know, it'd feel bad. I would feel like, man, this doesn't seem right. That is just everything ends. His whole life ends. You know what I mean? But he lived to be really old. He had a lot of kids. He it makes note, he passed down his inheritance to all of his kids, and all these good things happened, which I feel like, generally speaking, maybe not entirely speaking, but we do good work and good things happen. You know what I mean? I don't know.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, honestly, the conclusion used to really bother me.
Mm-hmm.
Used to really bother me. It was totally unsatisfying for me. It was oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the
Absolutely.
kids died because God didn't protect the kids.
Uh-huh.
And then now what? He just gives me some new kids? Oh, it's okay. I got new kids.
But these are more beautiful kids.
I got some
right.
new, these
Yeah.
new kids are better kids.
Yeah.
Even better than my first kids.
It specifically says that, right? I think it's he has daughters and they're the most beautiful in all the land or something like that, right?
The others were just really ugly.
Yeah, they were terrible kids, clearly. Yeah, man, it used to really bother me. And I think because it just seemed just replace them. Here you go. I got you some new kids. Honey, we have kids at home, and these are the kids at home. But I think the message here is less God will kill your kids, and then if you're faithful to Him, He'll give you some new ones. The message of Job, you need to read it in coupling with Psalms and Ecclesiastes, and we've kind of tied these things in together a little bit. But it's life is very complex, and sometimes really bad things happen. So, what is our response in all this? And where is God in all this? And who is God in all this? And so in that whole context here, in the end, all these terrible things happen. What you see is that it's less about the ending erasing the scars or the new children replacing the ones he lost or something. And maybe it's not like a payment. But I think it is a really powerful sign of God's ultimate character that one of the fundamental ways he's described in the Old and New Testament is he's a God of redeeming and restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So even after immense tragedy, and tragedy is something we've all faced in life, and everybody will continue to face in life because life is not the way it ought to be right now. God's character in the midst of it is infinitely bigger than we can imagine, infinitely more capable than we can imagine, but also infinitely more life-giving and generous and restorative than we can imagine. And a lot of it reminds me a little bit of the end of like, the airing out the slightly nerd card now. It's not as much now as it used to be, but like Lord of the Rings, where after all of the, after the long journey, to Mount Doom and everything, Frodo, like they're back, right? And the Shire's restored, and it's beautiful, and it's a happy ending. But then Frodo, it's like it doesn't just end like that, right? He's got wounds on him. He's got memories
he's not the
like
same.
in him. He isn't the same. So like the restoration is very real. The pain of the journey is not erased, but the restoration is real. So it's like it's a both and, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just you end broken. Frodo wasn't broken, but he was changed. The world wasn't broken, but it was changed. And that is the world we're in right now. And we could probably all of us could spend time talking about the tragedies we've been through in our own life, or even things we're currently carrying, and the things that have broken parts of us and have changed us. But probably also all of us could talk about the ways that God has taken, as we've trusted in his ability and in his capableness and his goodness in the face of all these things that are impossible for us to handle, how God has taken those things and used them to create good and has even restored things that have been broken. So that's kind of how I have to read this whole thing. That's kind of how I have to interpret it in light of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and in light of the thrust of the book as a whole. God seems to be very against the black and white view of good things only happen to good people, bad things only happen to bad people. God doesn't agree with that.
Absolutely.
Because the rain falls on the just and the unjust. It's a rainy world that we live in. God invites the messy faith of Job, even the doubting of Job. He welcomes that. He wants that wrestling, and then he wants to meet us in it. And then also that God is so infinitely bigger than the box we like to put him in, and say, well, God, I put you in this box, and as long as you're in this box, I cannot see how you could possibly be capable of handling what just happened to me. And sometimes we need to go, well, take me out of the box first, because I don't fit in there. And then you've got to ask your questions. So for you guys, wrapping up this whole journey with the book, what would you say, 3 episodes in, what would you say is the biggest lesson or takeaway from Job that you currently carry with you, or that you will carry with you?
I mean, I think it's in part a lesson on perspective, and at least from like Job's stance, I think that's like his response is by and large how many of us would respond and have responded in times of like great difficulty or tragedy or whatever. And, I think like even hearing God's perspective, like if we really believed that God was in control and that he's got basically the entire world that he's just holding in his hands at his command, everything, he could change our circumstances with a word. I think we might treat those things a little differently. I don't know. And if we had the greater perspective, obviously like we're all human. And so we tend to experience things in a box that is our world and our perspective. And, it's rare, I think, for many people to step outside of our box and go, hey, actually, what's the bigger picture here? What are we missing from this? And oftentimes, especially in times of difficulty and tragedy, we fail to step outside of our own situation and say, like, God, what is your intention with my life? What is your plan? How can you, because there's been so many things in my life that seemed bad on the front end, and then, like you struggle through it and you're like, oh man, you're fighting depression, you're fighting anxiety, you're fighting whatever. And you're like, God, I don't know how you're going to fix this. And 6 months later, or a year later, or even a week later, you're like, wow, I in the moment, I did not see how this was going to resolve, you know what I mean? Or be a good thing, or be redeemed or whatever. And sometime in the future, you look back and you go, wow, I never would have imagined this situation would resolve in this way. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I just think there's so many things that it's so hard to see in the moment. But for the average listener out there, it's like, man, if you're going through something tough, like God is the God of redemption, and He can take those situations that seem impossible and spin them, oftentimes flip them on their head for something good. So yeah, that's kind of the main message I could take away from Job, but among others.
Yeah, makes sense.
So,
A lot of what I sort of take away from this really is the idea of like the world isn't simple and neither is God. And the way that he works in a complex world is even more complex, And the way that I've run into this, like when you simplify things down like that, you often end up, well, ultimately being a really bad comforter if that's what you were trying to do. Because I'm guilty of that, mostly directed at my own self. Things are going bad, and I'm like, yo, do I have sin in my life right now? Am I getting punished right now for something? That's really more of just like I grew up in a particular tradition that was, I don't know, it taught me to think that way. But ultimately, it's that like hyper simplistic. If something bad is happening, it's because I'm bad or they're bad. Why did that earthquake happen? It's because the people there were evil. Why did that hurricane hit them? That's because whatever. And people I hear all the time try to come up with any number of things. Haven't you heard the kind of parties those people throw? Of course their house caved in. And stuff like that. People were doing that. I mean, they're literally any hurricane. But like way back when, what was it? Katrina hit Louisiana. And the first thing that people were talking about was, what's the big party that they throw there again?
Mardi Gras.
Yeah, Mardi Gras. That's what they were like. It was because of Mardi Gras. That's why. And you're like, yo. And so it's just like I see a lot of that, and then you can also find the flip of that too, which is like, well, if you're righteous and holy, you gonna get so rich, bro. And that's what like megachurch pastors will tell you, right? Like, why are they so rich? Why does that megachurch pastor have a private jet? Yo, it's because he's so holy, though. And you simplify it all down, and you simplify ultimately like God's justice and righteousness, faithfulness, the way He works in the world, is all in predictable, retributive ways often, and it's just. This whole book is basically just kicking that in the backside the whole way through. And, in the end, just like what Nate's been saying, you get a different look at creation and a different look at God. And even with like the end story, I have like kind of like a pet, like hot take on the last story. It's kind of like your last moment to kind of check if you grabbed onto the point of things, where it's like, all right. And at the end, he got double the livestock, double the children. All right. And it's like, okay, is that like what is that? Is it because Job did a good job, so now he gets his reward? And it's like, no. If you did that, you fell for the trap, bro. Righteousness and doesn't just equal reward in that way. It's not, he isn't restored because he earned it, and he passed a test or something. It's not transactional. And so, like, none of that, compassion that God has on him at the end, it's not like it undoes his grief from before. He's still living with that. And
Yeah,
so
Michael, I think that's a really good point that you're making. I don't mean to interrupt if you have more though.
no, that was basically my last kind of
Yeah.
little point there. It's like, it's just not that simple. You walk through it with God. It's a relational thing, and you'll have lots of ups and downs throughout it all. And that's life.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and to piggyback on that point, I hate to admit this when it comes to when I have opportunities in my past, whenever I've taught at a classroom setting, or just discussing among friends or helping people understand something or another, I have this terrible little habit that I enjoy doing way too much. and it's what you're talking about, Michael. It's after I'm done getting across something or helping someone clear something up, clarify it for them. I like to set up a little trap. I like to say something or ask something so that purposefully leads them in the wrong way, so that I can figure out, did they really understand what I just said? Did it actually make sense to them? Or are they going to think the same thing regardless of what we just went through, And so I think that's very astute there, because, the whole thing is, not the whole thing, but like a big part of it is, how God really hates the black and white, or really, that's what he rebukes in the Friends. And that's what he encourages in Job, the opposite of getting messy, jumping in the mud, not being afraid of being wrong. And that's what leads me to my answer to your question, Nate, is my big takeaway is exactly that there are so many times where I need to have the right answers. I need to have the answer, and sometimes maybe I get it right. Sometimes maybe I get it completely wrong. But God's response was, it's that process that you're going through. It's that willingness to wrestle with me. It's the willingness to listen to what I have to say and to engage, and not, for me, it takes away the pressure of always having to be right, always having to find the way, because I know what direction I'm pointed at. I know that I'm not going to just resort to the black and white of the Friends. I'm not going to just say, well, this is how it is, and not engage. And I'm also not just going to sit back and say, oh, well, God's bigger and better and badder than I am, so I'm just going to shut up, because that's obviously what he wants me to see. The fact that Job didn't get a rebuke, even though he was definitely wrong on a number of things, you can say, but he didn't get a rebuke because it's the process that God enjoyed, that Job was engaging with him, and I think that's so big.
It's interesting too that at no point in this story does Job ever find out, like, God never pulls back the curtain and goes, here's what was going on the whole time. Like, Job
here's the
seemingly
master
never
plan.
gets that answer. Yeah. It just things just unfold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And God says, are you gonna trust me, basically? You know what I mean? Like you can trust me. I'm the one who put all this stuff together. You know what I mean? And that just struck me that, like, even at probably towards the end of the story, like, at no point did Job get the details. Or Michael, you mentioned the complexities. Like, things were not simple. And Job never got that explanation. You know what I mean? But it didn't matter. Like, he was able to trust God, that God was going to go before him and ahead of him and make sure that things worked out. You know what I mean? Because, I don't know. That just struck me that he never got that piece of information,
Because how many times in real life will we ever get that piece of information? Like, it almost never, we're not, it's not going to be this big book that we're going to be able to open and have the direct answers, like Nate said, when it comes to the Bible, but instead it helps us reframe our perspective. And so, with that being said, to here, Nate, I would like to hear what your takeaway is for Job that sits with you as strong as the things that sat with us.
Yeah, I mean, everything you guys said is fantastic. I think there's a lot of meditation that any of us could do on any one of the points you guys brought up, and it's one of the reasons why I'm glad we spent a few episodes covering Job. It's a big book, and there's like I said, like we've all talked about, there's a lot of moving pieces here. I think one of the biggest things for me is the importance of remembering who it is I'm dealing with. When it comes to doing my own processing, when it comes to how I am evaluating or dealing with or responding to the hard things in my own life. And this has been like an 8-year journey for me since, Savannah was diagnosed. Just the importance of, like it was for Job, to remember who God is and what he can handle, whether from Job's own past or even just from the world around him. It's really important for me individually, and then I just think for all of us, to, as we are processing through the hard things, to take time to also remind ourselves of who it is we're processing to or with. It really does make a difference when you suddenly take the time to remember that the God of the universe is the God that you're talking to, the God that created you and holds all of your life together, the same God that has like brought incredible blessing on your life in the past, or taken care of things that you thought were impossible in the past, or the same God from these stories you read about in the Bible, the same God that I've heard family members and friends tell their own testimonies about, his provision or his, miraculous intervention. And like, that is the same God that I'm talking to now. And my tendency, and I think maybe it's a human tendency, is to hyperfixate, to zoom in, right, as it were, to the exact situation, to this moment, to the things that I'm seeing around me or feeling around me right now in this moment. And I think that, flick the scroll wheel back a little bit, zoom out, and remind yourself of the context of your life and the context of the God that you are complaining to. And I don't mean complaint in a negative sense, because Job did a whole lot of complaining and God didn't rebuke it. God invited it.
That's right.
But when we are doing the complaining and the lamenting and whatever else, I think that's healthy. I think it can be important, but to zoom out and see the context, to remember your own past and then the world around you and who it is. Who is this God? What do you believe about this God that you are voicing your complaint to? I think that's the single biggest thing for me. It has been for years and it will continue to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us on this three episode mini series here.
Thank you, Michael and Kanan.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for letting us join. It was a good time.
Yep. And for those of you who also joined us out in the pod sphere, thank you guys. Coming up next time, we will be tackling another question in an easy way. That's what it means to take the easy approach. So hope you join us then. We'll see more of Michael or Kanan down the road. I am certain of it.
Absolutely.
But till then, everybody, take it easy.